many as I can do up there.
Wonderful.
Okay. Okay, and maybe we should start.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. So glad that you're here. My name is Ann Botaw. I am the Director of Health and Wellness at the Senior Center at the Y. It is called the Center for Adults Living Well at the YMHA of Washington Heights and Inwood. I am so glad to be joining you virtually. I cannot wait to see you in real life, in real time. In the meantime, we are here today with a virtual visit through Fort Tryon Park with naturalist Leslie Day. Leslie Day is not only a member of the Y and a member of the Senior Center, she's also a friend and a neighbor and an author of many books, including this one that I just picked up. And I can't wait to read it. I have been reading it as we've gone along this week, because I'm now looking out and witnessing nature in a different way than I ever have before, because I can't go outside as freely as I have in the past. And I'm going to go ahead and hand it on over to Leslie Day. Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you, Ann. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My husband and I moved to this neighborhood 9 years ago. And the reason we moved here is because of Fort Tryon Park. But we came from, let me see if I can do it this way. Nope. All right, how do I? Ah, good. We came from a very beautiful place. We had lived on a houseboat on the Hudson River at West 79th Street Boat Basin for 36 years. I moved there in 1975 as a young single woman, and it's where I met my husband, who lived across the dock on his boat. And it's where we raised our son. It's where I became a naturalist and a teacher. I had always loved nature, but I also loved Manhattan, and was born on the Upper West Side. And I had moved out to California, to the Bay Area in the late 60s, and lived on a boat in Sausalito, and then got very homesick. And when I came back, moved back to West 73rd Street, and then found a boat for rent at the boat basin and moved down there. And I was in heaven because I was surrounded by the natural world. I could look out my window and see rainbows and, let me see here, sunrises and gorgeous sunsets. And I love nature, but I didn't really know that much about it. I used to walk our dogs in, let's see, can you see that my cursor as I move around? Can you see it? Yes. I used to walk our dogs in Riverside Park in the morning and afternoon. My husband did the evening walks. And I always had birdseed in my pocket. Our neighbor had an elderly parrot named Bobo, who was a picky eater. I mean, this parrot was like 80 years old. And our neighbor would give me the extra seed, and I would throw it out for the birds as I walked the dogs. And, I knew the names of some birds then. So this is about 1983. Pigeons and little brown birds called sparrows. But one day, this beautiful little bird showed up. I had no idea what she was. And she followed me. She started following me on my morning walk and my afternoon walk. She followed me day after day, week after week, month after month. After a few weeks, I borrowed a field guide to birds from a friend. I didn't own any field guides. I don't think I even knew what a field guide was. And I looked her up, and I discovered that it was a northern cardinal, a female. And after that, I learned everything I could about cardinals, and then I wanted to learn about all the trees and the other birds and flowers and mushrooms and the fish that swam by and crabs. And I went back to school, and I became a pre-K teacher. I started writing books, of course, field guides, and she just completely changed my life. She was my muse. She followed me for 3 years. She would sit on the railing along the river and call to me at sunup. I would go out and feed her. Once I was teaching at the 92nd Street Y, and I came home walking around the traffic circle. And she flew to me out of the blizzard. And I went back and got seed for her and the other birds. But one day, after 3 years, a handsome, red, gorgeous male showed up. And she took off with him, and I never saw her again. But she changed my life. There are amazing animals at the boat basin. Every once in a while, a harbor seal would haul up on a floating dock and face the east in the morning to get the sun, and then flop over and face the New Jersey side to get the afternoon sun. Excuse me. One day, a beautiful duck showed up, a mandarin duck. Maybe you read about one that was in Central Park. I don't know, was it like a year ago? But this little beauty showed up and he hung out with the mallards for about 2 weeks. Extraordinary. These are just a couple of the really special animals we saw. But then, I know all good things must come to an end, and they moved the shipping channel closer to Manhattan, away from the Jersey side. And when the Circle Line boat would go by, or the oil barges, or the Coast Guard, or just recreational boaters, it would send in huge wakes, and it got very rocky, and I started to lose my balance. By then, I'm in my mid-60s, and I said to my husband, time to go to terra firma. At the same time, in 2011, my brother had moved up to this neighborhood, and when we visited him, we saw the beautiful Fort Tryon Park, and we were sold. We found a 2-bedroom apartment on the corner, 295 Bennett, facing the park, so that's a view from my window back then, looking out at the lower park, and a view of the rocks, the amazing Bennett Avenue cliffs, which really is made of Manhattan schist, the bedrock of Manhattan Island. And just, you know, through the seasons from my window, it just, I loved being at the boat basin, but I love being up here. And it's because of this park. I view in spring of the serviceberry trees in bloom with the white blossoms. A month after we moved, let me turn up the sound. A month after we moved up, oh, probably. A month after we moved up here, Hurricane Irene hit. Rained for 3 days. It was August 2011. And this is the river on Bennett Avenue. There was so much water, it looked like Yosemite when I looked out the window and saw that waterfall. In the fall of that year, I reached out to Jennifer Hoppe, who is the head of Northern Manhattan Parks. And I told her I was a new neighbor and she knew of my books. And I said, I'd be happy to lead walks and give talks. And so that's how I started. And you know, when you teach anything, you have to learn as much as you can about it. So you sound intelligent. And I had never known this, but I found out that much of the acreage of Fort Tryon Park was broken up into estates. And one of the largest was owned by C.K. Billings, an industrialist from Chicago, a multimillionaire, who came up here basically because he liked to race his horses. He had 150 horses, and they had just built the Harlem River Raceway. This was his mansion facing the Hudson. A lot of this, you know, is still there. The arcade that they used to drive through. The mansion is gone. These were his stables where he housed 150 horses and his grooms. This is the Harlem River Speedway, which is now the Harlem River Drive. I love this picture. So I think this is pretty much Broadway. And then Bennett Avenue hadn't been created yet, but this is his estate. These were his stables. You can see how steep it is. And you know, although the ridge is Manhattan schist, which really were enormously tall mountains 500 million years ago, as tall as the Himalayan mountains, and have been worn away over time to what we see today. The bedrock here underneath in the low-lying valley is inwood marble, and marble is washed away by rain and by the rivers. And in fact, that's why Manhattan is an island, because it's surrounded by marble, which is water soluble. So John D. Rockefeller Jr. bought the land and wanted to make a park for the people of the city of New York. And he hired Frederick Law Olmsted, the designer of Central Park and Prospect Park and many other parks throughout the country. He hired his sons to landscape it. This is their drawing. So this is Bennett Avenue, and here's Broadway, and this is where I live. And here's the walk we're going to do. We're going to start here, and go through to about here. And the next week we'll go all the way to Dyckman. At the same time as Rockefeller was building Fort Tryon Park, they were building the subway so it would reach up here. And here is our subway station across the street, our beautiful A-train, amazing little subway station built into the rocks. So this is a picture of Bennett Avenue in 1932. And here's a picture of the Ann Loftus Playground, right when it was completed, also in the 30s. So I'm ready to start the walk. In looking out my window, I see 1, 2, 3, 4 oak trees that are now in flower. The new leaves are coming out, and you see these long catkins, and they are the male flowers that produce the pollen. The female flowers are in the axils of the leaves, and it's the female flower that produces the acorns. These are baby acorns starting out. Now, of course, acorns are an extremely important food for the animals during the winter. Our squirrels love them, and our birds. This is an eastern towhee eating a pin oak acorn, and this is a northern grackle, a common grackle eating a pin oak acorn. Here's a blue jay eating 3 pin oak acorns. And we do have pin oaks too, but I'm talking about the northern oak right now. And of course, our birds nest in oak trees. Oak trees are enormously tall trees. They're considered canopy trees. This is a robin's nest. And you can tell robin's nest because they always have lots of little dead grass hanging down. Often they have ribbons. The cup itself is made of dried mud. And Anne was telling me when she walks in Inwood Hill Park, she's really, before the leaves came out, she really noticed the bark and how every species of tree has a different bark. This is an oak, this is a northern red oak tree. Oak trees have bark with these fissures, these vertical fissures. Next tree as we walk in is an understory tree where the oaks are canopies. This little tree is called a hawthorn tree, is an understory tree. It's maybe 15 feet tall. It has leaves with teeth, scalloped edges. It has flaky bark. It's called hawthorn because haw is the Old English word for berry, and hawthorn because they have thorns. Right now they're in flower, and the flowers will produce berries, and the berries are loved by birds, robins and cardinals and starlings and blue jays and cedar waxwings. Cedar waxwings, although you don't see them that often because they're usually pretty high up in the trees, they stay together in small family flocks, and they are gorgeous birds, and we have them here. They're called waxwings because they have these little bits of color that look very waxy on their wings and on their tail feathers. If berries are hard to reach, the cedar waxwings will line up on a branch, and one will go out to the very end and get a berry and pass it on to the next one and down the line. This is a female house finch eating hawthorn berries. I recently, well, in the fall, put a feeder out on my fire escape. We have so many house finches. This is the beautiful hawthorn tree up in the Heather Garden. You can see the George Washington Bridge. And I just want to give a little plug for the volunteer gardeners. We meet Thursday morning starting at 8:30. And even right now, John, here's John, the head gardener, he's assigning people different times so we can social distance. And he tells us what to prune, what weeds to pull. It's a wonderful community, and they're always looking for new people. Now I'm going to talk about another group of very tall trees, our elms. So this is the corner of Bennett and Broadway. That's either number 7 bus or the 100 bus. And when you looked up, at first, a couple of weeks ago, you saw a lot of green. I think it's leaves, but it's seeds, elm seeds. Maybe tens of thousands of seeds on one tree. And as you walk through the park and look down, you'll notice them. The surrounding green is actually called a samara, which means wing. So this is a winged seed that can fly down from the tree to the ground. In the very center is the seed. These seeds are loved by birds. This is a white-throated sparrow. I mean, I have seen robins and pigeons and starlings eating them. This is an evening grosbeak eating them. This is just bountiful source of food for birds at this time of year. This is the bark of our elm on the corner of Bennett and Broadway. Now, this is a small elm that has produced what's called a burl. If a tree is injured, if a branch falls off and there's an opening in the bark, or if there's a virus or a fungus, the tree will start to produce cells to close it up. But sometimes the cells run rampant, almost like a cancerous growth, but it's not a cancerous growth. It's a defense. Woodworkers love burls because the grains inside grow in every which way. And maybe you've seen tables or chairs or even bowls that are made from burls. They are just so beautiful. In 2012, in October, we had a terrible storm, Hurricane Sandy. And I don't know, maybe it was 11 o'clock or midnight, we heard a series of booms out our window. And it was too dark to see anything. But when dawn came, I looked out. So this is looking south. Here's that auto body garage, and here's our building. When we looked out, we saw all these gigantic dead trees that had fallen over, and they were all elms. Some of them were 100 years old. The trees were still covered with leaves, and the crowns acted like sails. So we had extremely high winds that night, if you remember. And Fort Tryon Park lost hundreds and hundreds of trees. This is like the morgue. This is where they stacked up all the bodies just inside the Bennett Avenue entrance. Here I am with our dog who passed on a few years ago. But look at the size of these trees. This is, so sorry. This is our elm up in the Heather Garden. It's our oldest elm. Jennifer Hopper thinks it's at least 100 years old. As you may have heard, there's a disease, a fungus called ophiostoma, or Dutch elm disease, that's been killing our American elms and has killed something like 77 million elms over the last 100 years. And so Jennifer has paid arborists to come in and inject fungicide into all the elms. And it's actually something she raises money for. So if you give money, if you donate money to Fort Tryon, that's one thing you could donate your money to protect our elms. This is our famous Siberian elm in the Heather Garden. This was not planted. Some little bird flew over and pooped out one of those seeds. It's called a volunteer because it just grew up by itself, but it's so magnificent. And right now, all kinds of Siberian bluebells are blooming underneath it. When you walk through the park, you'll start to see this. Squirrels will come along, or birds, and prune, trying to get to the seeds, and you'll see the new leaves of the elm on the ground attached to the seeds. Now I just want to look at a few plants in the garden when you first walk into the Bennett Avenue, the northern entrance to the park. We have these beautiful summer snowflakes, absolutely gorgeous, and each little bell is tipped with green. This is cherry laurel that's blooming now. And you can see just hundreds and hundreds of bees. New York State has 4,000 species of bees. And many of them are just tiny little bees. Some of them are big, and I'll show you some of those later. This is what the flowers look like close up. So the bees go inside to get nectar and pollen. This is a plant up against the inner wall. It's called a Mahonia, or Oregon grape. It was in flower just a couple of months ago, and the flowers produce these beautiful green berries that turn blue in the summer and are loved by the birds. These are northern flickers. eating the berries. Cedar waxwing family. This is called Brunera macrophylla. It's great forget-me-not, or bugloss. It has gorgeous little blue flowers. Now picture was taken in the fall, but it's a good view of the next three trees I'm going to talk about. This is a staghorn sumac. We're going to do that one first. Right now, this is what they look like. Straggly little things poking up, and they're starting to get leaves. These are compound leaves. This whole thing is a leaf. These are leaflets, and the leaf stem is really fuzzy. When you touch it, it feels like velvet. And they named it staghorn sumac because it looks and feels like the horns of a male deer. On the bark, you see these little white lines that are called lenticels, and those are breathing pores for the trees. Most trees have them. There are breathing pores under the leaves called stomata that take in carbon dioxide so the leaves can produce glucose in photosynthesis. But the tree needs oxygen, and these breathing pores take in oxygen and release carbon dioxide. They produce these beautiful flowers, fuzzy flowers, and then the flowers produce berries that are loved by birds in the winter. To me, they're some of the most gorgeous leaves in autumn. I can't photograph them enough. The next group so this picture was taken in 2014. This tree started to turn brown then, and it died. So right now we still have these two trees. This was taken the other day in the park. These are called Japanese cedar trees, and they're the national tree of Japan. Our next tree is an American birch, very tall. Let me just go back to, you can see it's one of the tallest trees in the lower park. Its leaves are emerging, and new leaves are just luminescent. The beech tree has a bark that as it grows, it stretches out and it's very thin. It's one of the only trees you can carve your initials in. And the Roman lovers had a saying, and the saying was, as this tree grows, so may our love. Because as the bark stretches, the initials get bigger and bigger. The next tree is on the east side of the path. So this is Broadway. Here's that little outdoor parking lot. This is called a viburnum, Siebold's viburnum. Siebold was a physician in the 19th century who went to Japan and taught Western medicine to the Japanese and learned Eastern medicine from the Japanese physicians. But he was also a botanist, and he collected seeds all over Japan and brought them back to Germany. And then they spread far and wide. It's a beautiful shrub, a very tall shrub with gorgeous flowers that produce berries in the fall. And they're all over Fort Tryon Park. Our next tree is another small tree called an Eastern redbud. You know, this is sort of an interesting presentation because everyone you'll see is wearing masks. And we, of course, will never forget this time. But I always see people sitting under the redbud because the flowers are so beautiful. They're little pea-like flowers. And the flowers themselves are edible and birds love them. There's a cardinal eating some. This is our largest native bee. It's a carpenter bee, and they have very little hair on their abdomen, and they're just like the size of a little Buick. But they won't bother you. They're just out there nectaring, gathering nectar. Here's the European honeybee, also gathering nectar and pollen because the honeybee brings both back to her nest. At this stage of her life, she's about 4 weeks old. Sorry. And she is a forager. You can see lenticels on the redbud bark. And remember, those are the breathing pores. The leaves of the redbud are beautiful. They're heart-shaped. When they first come out, they're red. They turn this orangey green. And the flowers produce the seed pods that are eaten by birds. This is up by the new leaf. Another young woman sitting under a red bud with her matching bandana. As we walk north, we get to these steps going up to the upper park, and they're flanked by two enormous trees called tulip trees or yellow poplars. These trees have extremely tall, straight trunks, and the leaves are so unusual. They're the only leaves that have this notch in the top, and they produce, well, this is what the seed pod looks like, but first let me show you the flower. The tulip tree was named for its flower that kind of looks, I guess, to some like a tulip. But the flowers are so high up, you can wear, unless you have binoculars, it's hard to see them. But after a while, they start to fall down once they're pollinated. And what's left is the center, which becomes the seed pod. The trunk is very straight, deeply ridged, and it was used by Native Americans to make dugout canoes because the trunks were so straight and long. Now I'm going to finish up with some little videos of animals, of our wonderful animals and their behavior. So we don't have any ponds or streams, but when it rains, we have little potholes, and the birds take advantage of that. And here we have a starling bathing, and then a little house sparrow, a male house sparrow, joined the starling. And birds need to keep their feathers clean, but they have an oil gland right above their tail, and they take oil from there on their beak, and they preen all their feathers, which makes them waterproof, but they still need to get dust and dirt off their feathers. This was a video taken by a friend, a neighbor who lives downstairs, Liana, of a woodchuck who had climbed, sorry it's a little fuzzy, but it's close up, climbed up this oak leaf hydrangea and was able to figure out how to pull it down. I have a feeling he or she had a lot of experience with this, because watch what he does next. Okay, now he's standing and he's eating the new leaves. They are just the cutest. You know, all those years I lived in Riverside Park, never ever saw a woodchuck or groundhog. Never saw skunks up there. Once in a while we would see raccoons, but up here we have everything. I took this picture up in the upper park by the Heather Garden several years ago. But once we were gardening up there on a Thursday morning, and a woman screamed. She had a baby in a baby carriage. She said, I just saw a woodchuck carrying a rat in its mouth. Well, the woodchuck was the mother, and she was moving her babies from one nest to another. They nest underground, and she would go right by us and go underground, get one baby, bring it up, and take it to a different channel underground, a different nest, burrow. I love woodchucks. Our head gardener hates them, but they live here and they're not doing a lot of damage, and they're just wonderful to see. This is another video my neighbor took of a red-tailed hawk feeding on probably a rat. There's a young red-tail that's been sighted almost every time I go out into the park. I see it. It flies low, it's hunting. I don't know how many years ago this was, maybe 5. There was a red-tailed hawk nest on a fire escape on Fairview Avenue, where you could see the nest from Broadway. And for many weeks after the babies hatched and fledged, they hung out on the rocks here, and they would call to each other. You know, can you see that? Shake your heads, because I can't see. Can you see the babies? There were triplets. Okay, I'm going to end. I can't see you or hear you, but I'm going to end with this wonderful video. A man comes and plays the bongos, and he has a boombox playing Spanish music, and this couple with their twins who are having lunch in the cart We're the most wonderful dancers. The kids were out playing and they would dance, and when the kids would get too close to the path, they'd run off and get them. But here they put them in and the babies are having lunch. I wanted to end it with this. And next week we'll go further. We'll go to Dyckman Street, and I'll talk about more plants and animals. And that's it.
Oh my gosh. Thank you, everybody. I've just unmuted you all. If you have any questions, that was even better than I could have possibly imagined.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Leslie.
Wow.
Thank you.
Any questions?
That was fun.
You want me to switch you over?
She was really good.
It's really good.
Thank you. No questions? Come on.
I'm
Okay.
looking forward to next week.
All right, good.
Me
And then what we'll
too.
do, we'll go up after next week. We'll complete the lower park, and then the following 2 weeks we'll do the Heather Garden.
Wonderful.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
Great. Thank you, Leslie.
That
Thank
was
you, Lisa.
wonderful. Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yes.
Bravo. Thank you so much.
Well, it's a
Bravo.
pleasure to share this with you.
This is one of Leslie's several books. Somebody asked me which book this was in the chat box, and it's called A Field Guide to the Street Trees of New York, but you've also written The Honeybee Hotel.
If you go
And-
to my website, leslieday.nyc, you can see my books. And now, you know, I can't lead any walks right now, so it's so wonderful for me to be able to do it. So thank you, Anne, for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you for doing this. This was so much fun. And my cat, my cat has been very ill. I don't know if you saw her, but she was drawn when you started talking about that little cardinal being your muse. That's when she came
Aw. Aw.
to my muse.
We
You can-
have a bird and 2 cats, and I made my husband take the bird into the bedroom because he's always landing on my head and pooping on my head. So, but he had to
Oh
go.
my gosh, that was so good. Well, I made a recording and I'm going to I'll send it to everybody who was here,
Please.
and I'll send it to people who meant to come and just couldn't today.
That'd be
That's
great.
nice. That's great.
So much in that. And I think that I'm going to keep reading that or going through it and trying to figure out what I'm seeing out of my window.
All right. And if there's anything else you want me to include, guys, next time, let me know.
Okay.
You can email me
Wow.
or through Anne. Thank you, Jody. Thank you, Elisa. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you.
Curry,
Okay.
thank you
It
for
was
coming.
fun.
And see you. I know that's you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Stop share.
That was one of our, stop the recording.